How to Judge Yourself Without Self-Hatred, the Buddha's non-reactive skill. I received a letter today from someone who's having a problem with his inner critic, basically asking, how do you get the inner critic to shut up? That's not the solution. We all need an inner critic to pass judgment on what we're doing as we practice, to get an idea of what's going to be helpful and what's not. The problem is, our inner critic was trained by somebody else, not by the Buddha. It was trained by the mass media, by our parents, by our friends, by our teachers, by the internet, all of whom have lots of conflicting standards of value. No matter what you do, you can be criticized from somebody's point of view. When you do something, one set of values will say it's good, but another will say it's wrong. Then you try to please the second, and the first set of values will say, no, that's wrong. What you need is to let the Buddha train your inner critic, the inner voice who passes judgment on what you're doing, to let you know what's really skillful and what's not. This is a theme that runs all the way through the practice from the very beginning, up to the highest levels. In the beginning, we work with generosity and virtue, and we want to be clear about what we're doing when we're in line with our precepts and when we're not. I got another phone call this morning from someone who, in a fit of real anger, had intentionally killed a mosquito. Even though it was a very small animal, the fact that she had intentionally killed it scared her. She had talked to some of her Dhamma friends afterwards, and they had said, "Oh, don't think so much about it. You probably didn't mean to." She told me, "Well, I did mean to." The friends who were trying to make her feel good were actually trying to anesthetize her inner critic. But when that happens, your precepts start getting sloppy. When your precepts are sloppy, then your concentration gets sloppy, and your discernment gets dishonest. So you have to start training the critic. The training in meditation begins with some very basic instructions. The passage where the Buddha tells Rahula, "Try to make your mind like earth. Bad things are dumped on the earth, but the earth doesn't react." You can extend that to say that perfumes can be poured on the earth, but the earth isn't pleased. We're often told that we try to make the mind non-reactive and non-judging, but it's more an issue of making it non-reactive for the purpose of judging more clearly. In other words, you learn to see negative things inside you without getting upset, without getting roiled up about them. Accept the fact that they're there, and then ask yourself, in a matter-of-fact way, what can I do to change them? You recognize that they're unskillful, but you're not knocked over by that fact. If you get knocked over, that means that your sense of self, or more precisely, your prideful sense of self, has gotten in the way. You don't like to see unskillful things in yourself, so you try to hide them, which is not going to get rid of them. You need to have the mental solidity and stability to say, yeah, there are unskillful things in my mind, so now what do I do about them? You have to have confidence in the Buddha's teachings, that the tools he gives you can deal with those negative voices and with the negative things going on in your mind in a skillful way. Then, we further train in mindfulness in this way. The Buddha said one of the functions of mindfulness on the path is to remember what right view tells you about what's right and what's wrong, what's skillful and what's not. Then you use your ability to keep that in mind to direct your efforts, to get rid of what's unskillful and to encourage what's skillful. Think of the image of the gatekeeper at the gate to a fortress. The gatekeeper doesn't just sit there watching people coming in and going out through the gate. He's not a people watcher. He's not like the mannequin policeman that one scholar once said mindfulness functions as. In other words, The simple fact that there's mindfulness sitting at the gate means that your unskillful mind states are afraid to go in the fortress. If the gatekeeper just sits there and watches whoever comes in and goes out, he's not going to intimidate anybody. It's like driving past a mannequin policeman. The first time you see him, you might slow down, but then you notice that it's not a person, it's a mannequin. From that point on, you can ignore it with impunity. It's the same with your defilements. If you don't do something about your defilements, they're going to come in through the gate with impunity whenever they want and take over the place. Remember, the fortress is on a frontier where there are enemies, things that are actually bad for your mind. You've got to learn how to recognize them and make sure they don't come in. After all, mindfulness is coupled with alertness, and then it informs ardency, which again is right effort. So you're ardent to block the unskillful things as best you can. As the Buddha said, this is what right mindfulness does. It blocks them. Then discernment is what uproots them, gets rid of them totally. But to develop the ability to judge things clearly as to what they are and what they're not, you've got to get the mind in a non-reactive state. There are times when people coming into the fortress may look like friends, but they're not. They can dress themselves up and disguise themselves in all kinds of Buddhist ways. Laziness in particular can dress itself up like the Dhamma and say, well, the Buddha said for you to follow the middle way. It leads to the highest ease, so the path itself should be easeful too. But then you think of all the paths you've encountered in the world, and there are a lot of paths that go to really beautiful spots where you can rest, gaze peacefully out across a beautiful landscape. But getting there is not easy. There's a famous spot in the French Alps where photographers like to go to get spectacular pictures of Mont Blanc. But getting there requires hours and hours of climbing ladders built into cliff faces, and you have to be really fit to get there. It's just not the case that a path to an easeful goal has to be easeful too, or sometimes we're told, don't think that you're doing the path. The path is doing itself. After all, if you think you're doing the path, then you believe that there's a self, and that's wrong view. Well, the path doesn't get done that way. Whatever happens to get done would have to depend entirely on your past good karma. Your present karma wouldn't be contributing anything at all, and that wouldn't get you very far. You need to have a provisional sense of you as being responsible for the path, along with the confidence that you are competent to do it and that you will benefit. That's why the Buddha talks about the self as its own mainstay, the self as a governing principle. Even when he has Rahula talk to himself about looking at his actions, it's always, this action that I want to do, this action I'm doing, this action I have done. You're responsible. You're an agent. Now, you get to a point at the end where you can put the agent down, because it is a strategy. But in the meantime, you've got to use that strategy all along the way. So watch out for these voices that tell you that the path is one of ease, and if you push yourself too hard, it's not the path. Of course, pushing yourself too hard is not the path, but what does too hard mean? You're not going to know until you push yourself. Think of the image of getting milk out of the cow. You twist the horn and you don't get any milk. Then you stop twisting the horn and you say, that's much more easeful. but you still don't get any milk, yet you need the milk. Remember, the Buddha's definition of beings is that we're feeding on things. This is what defines us all the way to arahantship, which means that we're not going to stop feeding when we first get on the path. We have to continue feeding to nourish the path. We can't tell ourselves, I'll just tell myself not to eat anymore and I'll be okay. You're going to starve and it's going to be painful. Then you'll go back and feed some more. So, you want to learn how to feed well, skillfully. Train your inner critic to be a connoisseur of what kind of feeding is skillful and what kind of feeding is not, what sense of self is skillful and what sense of self is not, keeping in mind that you do have these choices. You need to train your inner critic because, after all, a lot of the path is about value judgments. Think of what Sariputta said about the main message of the Buddha's teachings being the ending of passion and desire. Dispassion is a value judgment that the processes of fabrication we engage in are not worth it. Before we get there, though, we have to learn how to fabricate the path and to judge what's on the path and what's off the path. There's a right path and there's a wrong path. There are causes of suffering that respond to simply looking at them with equanimity, but there are others that respond only when you fabricate a fabrication. And to master both of those approaches, you've got to develop good powers of concentration. Think about the Buddha's teachings on equanimity. There's ordinary equanimity, which is what we start out with. That's the equanimity of training the mind to be like earth. But you can't stop there. To make the mind solid enough so that when it looks at something, it's not tempted to go for it, it has to have an inner sense of well-being. This is the type of equanimity the Buddha recommends. It requires either the well-being that comes from concentration or the well-being that comes when you see with genuine insight that letting go of something really does lift a burden off the mind. But you've got to work on the concentration first to get the equanimity based on a sense of well-being that can look at things and see right through them and not be tempted to go for them. As for fabrication, the Buddha talks about three kinds: bodily, verbal, and mental. Bodily is your in and out breath. Verbal is how you talk to yourself. Mental covers the perceptions you hold in mind, the labels you put on things, and the feelings you focus on. These are the elements that go into how you shape your present experience. And where are you going to learn about these things? Through the practice of concentration. You focus on the breath, bodily fabrication. You talk to yourself about the breath to make it comfortable, verbal fabrication. You hold perceptions in mind that allow the breath to give rise to a feeling of ease, mental fabrication. It's by getting hands-on experience with these processes that you can do them well, and only when you do them well can you understand them well enough to let them go. So both ways of approaching the causes of suffering to arrive at a skillful judgment about them, looking with equanimity and fabricating a fabrication, require that you work on developing concentration. This is how you train your inner critic to be helpful in these activities, to pass judgment in a way that doesn't debilitate you. That's the main problem with most people's inner critic. It passes judgment and leaves no room for improvement, passes judgment and leaves no room for believing that you can actually do something right. Your inner critic has to be trained to understand that it is possible to put an end to suffering, and you can do it. You have to be responsible, but you are capable, and you really will benefit. That's the other part of the bad inner critic, the part that says, no matter how hard you try, it's going to be a waste, so don't even bother. That inner critic has to be banished and replaced, not with an uncritical mind, but with a more skillfully critical mind, starting with teaching yourself to be non-reactive. You can see unskillful things in you, and you don't get worked up about them. You recognize them as unskillful, and then you try to be very matter-of-fact in overcoming them. So that's how non-reactivity functions. It's a support, not for a non-judging mind, but for a skillfully judging mind, one that knows how to pass judgment in a way that leads to the end of suffering. When its work is done, then you can put it down. But you let it go not because you hate it, but because it's done all it can for you and you can part ways on good terms. Selves with skills. There's a principle that the things you know best are the things you do, the things you make. If you're a builder, you've had experience building houses, ordination halls. You see another house, you see another ordination hall, and you have an appreciation for what was done. If you're a writer, you see someone else do a really good piece of writing, and you recognize why it's good. Of course, the things you actually do yourself, you know those very well. You can look at every detail. I did this. I did that. This is how this fits together. The problem is that we do certain things so continuously, so frequently, that we're no longer conscious of what we're doing. As the Buddha pointed out, we construct our experience of the present moment through the way we breathe, through the way we talk to ourselves, through the feelings we focus on, the perceptions we use. In other words, the mental labels and images we use to identify things. We use these processes, what he calls fabrications, to put together the raw material that comes from our past karma. We're doing it all the time, but as the Buddha explains, we do it in ignorance, so we're barely aware of it. That's why we don't get the best results out of it. One of the reasons why we meditate is to become more conscious of these processes. As you're trying to get the mind into a state of concentration, you have to use those same processes to gather around your object. To begin with, you've got the breath that you're focusing on. Where in the body are you feeling it right now? Focus your attention there. Try to keep it there. That's going to require that you talk to yourself about it. In other words, if you notice that the mind is wandering off, you remind yourself to come right back. Then you try to figure out ways to keep it here. Ajahn Lee gives some good examples. Think of the breath not just as the air coming in and out through the nose, but also as the flow of energy through the body. Where do you feel that? Can it be comfortable? Is there a way of breathing that makes it comfortable? Short or long, fast or slow, deep, shallow, or in long, out short, in short, out long? Talk to yourself about this. And don't just talk, of course. Experiment. This will require that you use certain perceptions, certain images of how the breath flows in the body. Which images are most useful? Try to think of your experience of the body right now as totally breath. If there's any sense of blockage, remind yourself that the breath was there first, and it can still flow, so it doesn't have to tense up here to push its way through or to detour over there. It can flow easily through the body, easily as you breathe in, easily as you breathe out. In this way, you can create a feeling of ease. You become more conscious that this is how you put an experience together in the present moment. Then you begin to notice how you do it at other times of the day as well. And you notice that a lot of the ways that you process your experience of the world have a lot of identification around them. your way of doing things. This is the part of you that has an instinctive sense that, yes, you are constructing your experience. You're not just sitting here watching things happen on their own without any participation on your part. You're playing a role. And you tend to identify yourself with the things that you do well or things that come easily to you. But some of the things you do well may not necessarily be really skillful. We do greed well. We do anger well. Delusion. We're experts. And we have a very strong sense of self around these things. It's just the way I am. It comes naturally. In fact, you don't even think that you're doing it so much. It just comes. But actually, you are putting these things together. One of the important insights of the meditation is that even though you may be good at these things, and you have an instinctive sense of how to play these games, it's not always good to be playing them. There are better ways of putting the present moment together. We're kind of like beavers. Beavers go into a forest, and their idea of what's missing in the forest is a lodge in a pond, along with a dam to create the pond. They've done studies of beavers who were orphaned as little tiny kits, brought into captivity, and raised by human beings. The question was, would they be able to build their dams and their lodges without having experienced those things in the wild? Well, sure enough, when they were released into the forest, that was the first thing they did. Build a lodge, build a dam, create a lake. That's the way we are too. We instinctively do a process that the Buddha calls becoming. We get a sense of something we want, then we identify the world in which that desired object exists, and then we take on a role in that world. The role we assume has a lot to do with our sense of our skills. If you're good at anger, good at greed, good at aversion, good at delusion, they'll be part of the identity you take on. The Buddha wants to teach you that there are other ways of doing things. But the first thing he does is to have you build a better sense of becoming. He talks about what he calls the 4 bases for success. They describe how we succeed in putting a state of concentration together, based on desire, persistence, intent, and your powers of analysis. And just as we tend to identify with whatever skills we already have and tend to use, the Buddha wants to teach you how to create a state of concentration. And it doesn't matter that you create a sense of identity around the steps that get you there. In fact, it's going to be necessary. Just learn how to do it well. The desire has to do with your sense of you as the person who's going to enjoy the results of what you're doing. This is a large part of your motivation. You hear people in some schools of meditation saying that they meditate without any purpose, without any goal. It's as if they're showing off. But maybe that's their purpose. They're meditating to show off. We're here because we have a purpose. That's the nature of the mind. It's always got a purpose or purposes of some sort. So you think about what a good goal it would be to find something inside that doesn't change, a happiness that doesn't disappoint or require that you do anything ignoble. And it doesn't even require maintenance. It doesn't depend on anybody's suffering. Nobody's harmed by this. That's a good goal. The Buddha talks about that as delighting in the unafflicted, delighting in seclusion, and delighting in what he calls non-objectification. In other words, a goal that doesn't involve a sense of identity. You realize the identities you take on are all strategies. Once you've reached the goal, you can put the strategies aside, and there's no conflict. So use that sense of the goal, even though by necessity, it's going to be very sketchy. As the Buddha said, there's no way you can anticipate what Nibbana is going to be like before you really hit it. He gives you some general ideas, but he says that those are just arrows pointing in that direction. It's the ultimate bliss, freedom, a state of consciousness that doesn't depend on anything. It's a truth. You can rely on it. It's not going to change. And it's the ultimate. There's nothing better. Everything else in the world exists for the sake of something else. But here, there's no for the sake of anything. It's totally arrived. So think about that as where you're going. And if you have any idea that you'll be disappointed when you get there, the Buddha says that's wrong view. So have some confidence in this desire and do your best to create a sense of how much you would enjoy that. That's you as the consumer. The next step is persistence. You realize you can't just sit here and want this to come. As the Buddha said, the desire for there to be no aging, illness, and death, if you just sit there and desire it, is going to be suffering. But if you act on the proper path, you actually find that you can attain what you desire. That's you as the producer, you as the agent. Here you take delight in developing skillful qualities and abandoning unskillful ones. A large part of your identity as an agent lies in that delight. You enjoy doing these things. If it doesn't come naturally, you learn how to make it more natural, because that's an important part of wisdom. There are a lot of things that give good long-term results, but you may not like to do them. Yet, if you have any sense, any discernment at all, you'll talk yourself into wanting to do them. The same with the things that you would like to do but give bad results. You learn to talk yourself into not wanting to do them. The Buddha's discernment is strategic. We're not here just to accept things and be okay. We're here to figure things out, and especially to figure out our own likes and dislikes, to learn how to train our likes in the right direction. So, learn how to enjoy that particular identity as well. The agent who wants to do this, who delights in being persistent, who delights in whatever is required by the path. Then there's the self as the observer. That goes with intent. You really want to pay careful attention to what you're doing. It is possible to follow the Buddha's instructions without really paying careful attention, but you're not going to learn much. The Buddha never said that you can gain awakening simply by following steps A, B, C, D. The path requires that you put in your own willingness to really observe, all around, what you're doing. That's you as the observer. And finally, there's you as the commentator. This goes with analysis. When you've done something, ask yourself, how good are the results? This analysis requires a value judgment. Sometimes you hear it said that the Buddha doesn't want you to pass judgment on things, just accept them as they are. There's inconstancy in life, and there's stress in life, and there's a lot of stuff that's just not you, that you can't control. So just accept it and be okay with it. The Buddha never said that. That's taking the three characteristics and making them the main issue. The main issue is actually in the Four Noble Truths, starting with the fact that we suffer in our clinging. We cling because of craving, and we crave because of ignorance. However, it is possible to put an end to that ignorance, put an end to that craving, by following the path. These are truths that carry duties. The suffering is to be comprehended. The craving and the ignorance are to be abandoned. The goal is to be realized. And that's done by following and developing the path. That's the framework for our analysis. Then you look at what you've done. How does it measure up? Are there things you should be developing that you haven't developed yet? Are there things you should be abandoning that you haven't abandoned yet? When you get really good at this, you're not just passing judgment, you're also making suggestions. This is the self as commentator, which sends its messages back to the agent. How about trying this? How about trying that? If your commentator is nothing but an inner critic, this isn't good enough, that's not good enough. But without offering suggestions, you really need to train that inner critic. Just tell it. If you can't offer anything positive, can't offer any other options, then I'm not going to listen to you. Because you still want to maintain that desire, you as the consumer, and you want to develop that sense of competence in you as that agent. So you, as the observer and the commentator, go very closely together. When you develop them well, you're developing these bases for success, the desire, the persistence, intent, and your powers of analysis. As you get better and better at this, you find that you've got some new selves inside, defined around these bases for success. These are the selves you want to encourage. As for the selves that are really good at greed, aversion, and delusion, ask yourself, do you really want to continue identifying with them? You've got something better inside. That's one of the principles of the Buddha's teachings all around. If he's asking you to give up something, it's not to deprive you of anything that's really necessary or really good. It's because he's got better things to offer. So you want to learn how to identify with the desire for the path, the desire for the goal. Identify with the willingness to do what's needed, to be persistent in abandoning anything that's going to get in the way, developing things that will move you further. Identify with the observer, to be really, really observant, and with the inner commentator, the analyst, who both passes judgment on what's done and then tries to figure out, if something's wrong, what you can do to improve it. In the beginning, because you're not good at these skills, it's going to require a lot of pep talks and a lot of encouragement. But as you get better and better, and it becomes more natural, it really does feel more and more like you. You, the meditator. It's an identity that becomes more and more second nature. The time will come when you have to put it down. But in the meantime, use it. All these roles of the new you. As you see how you're putting all this together and getting really skilled at it, the skill is what confirms the sense of wanting to identify with this path. It's hard in the beginning when the path doesn't go as smoothly as you'd like, and you keep on thinking, there are other things I can do more easily, other things I can do better. But you have to remind yourself, this is the skill. These are the identities you want to develop. So take heart. There are some people who say they can't imagine themselves attaining any of the noble attainments. The response to that is, you get changed by the path. You'll become a different you. It's like learning a foreign language. Depending on the nature of the language and the people who teach it to you, you find that you develop a new personality in that language, and it's just as much you as your personality in your original language. So, develop the personality of a meditator until you get really fluent at it.